Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Gooey's Dungeon Dive, the show where I rank all of the dungeons in The Legend of Zelda. And joining me for our Wind Waker season is my special pal, Corey Richmond. How's it going, Corey?
Yo, 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 yo.
After Awakening Medley, we are now able to take on the next dungeon, the Earth Temple. This dungeon, it takes on the theme of a large tomb, and it's filled with, Poes, Redeads, Stallfulls, all the types of spooky creatures you expect to find in one, as well as some of Ganondorf's forces. We kind of keep up that sort of theme here, that Ganondorf has kind of commandeered these areas, so we're going to keep running into moblins and such. What really ties it all together for me, actually, is the dungeon theme. I really like this dungeon theme.
That was one of the first things that popped out to me. I think it's slept on. It's good. It's a pretty good, very atmospheric dungeon theme. It's pretty spooky.
It's a chilled out version of the style of the Forest Temple. And in that it's got some freaky noises off in the background that can kind of surprise you on the trek.
Yeah.
Something off in the distance is hollering. It's certainly not as intense, I'll give it that, but it fits that thematic element of the dungeon. But that's not the only thematic element of the dungeon. I actually feel like the main aspect of this dungeon, the main element from both the aesthetic and the gameplay, is the idea of using light and light cutting through the darkness in a dark tomb. It's reminiscent in a lot of ways of the Shadow Temple in Ocarina of Time, or Ancient Tomb or something like that. But I feel like the light element, which we've seen in other dungeons, is kind of a fun combination there.
The aesthetics and theme of this dungeon, I think, are some of the strongest aspects of it. Even, regardless of how you feel about the contents of the dungeon, I feel like it'd be hard to argue that this dungeon does a poor job of all of that stuff. Something that I feel like I hear people talk about a lot is the name being Earth Temple. How do you feel about that? Does that bother you? Does it feel like a misnomer?
No, I don't think so. I think you're in the earth, for one, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. I wasn't prepared for this question, but I do feel like...
That's why I ask, because it's never really felt like that much of a stretch to me, because it's Earth Temple, you're in the earth, it's about undead, and it's a tomb, literally. Mm-hmm. So that's never bothered me that much, but I do think maybe something more related to the darkness or the light or shadow or something might have been a little bit more...
Oh, okay.
A little more accurate, but I still feel like Earth Temple fits,
Yeah, no, it never really stood out to me, because I always thought of it as, when you die, you return to the earth,
Yeah.
The light and the dark, there's a lot of ways that comes out in the game, like you said, both through gameplay and just the visual aspects or the aesthetic elements. But I think the first real taste of it comes through controlling Medley with the command melody. We kind of see the next sort of evolution of the command melody, where we went from controlling some little stones to now a character who can fly around and step on switches and stuff like that, and who can also, of course, do the light thing.
It's kind of cool, because this really is one of the first times that it kind of feels like we're almost doing a co-op type dungeon thing. Obviously, you're controlling both characters, but the fact that you get to progress through it with both of them is, I think, utilized pretty well. Sometimes it can be a little bit of a hassle, just if it's a Medley gets captured or something, you have to go find her, even though that can be an interesting dynamic too, but sometimes it can feel like it slows down the pace a little bit. But I think the way that they implement the puzzles and the co-op puzzles, specifically with doing stuff like dual switches, like you had mentioned, where you have to put Medley on one, you have to put Link on the other, or you have to set Medley up in a specific position, redirecting a beam of light, or even just using her instrument to change the light at first. I think that's always done pretty well.
So there's a lot of obstacles or enemies, you could say, in the dungeon that you have to take on, and it requires you to divert the path of some sort of light source in the room. Link eventually gets the ability as well once you get the dungeon item, which is the mirror shield, but at first it's just Medley with the harp.
I like that a lot of the puzzles, it's like a beam of light coming from the windows or something, and there are even a couple rooms where you have to burn the curtains to open up the window to get light to shine in. So I feel like I actually get real Majora's Mask vibes from this dungeon. This reminds me a lot of parts of Icona Castle. This dungeon was a cool way of kind of evolving and iterating on that concept.
Like I think of in Stone Tower Temple, there's elements of that, of like the light and the dark and the dual nature type thing. And you had some of those puzzles in there too, like where you had to use the mirror shield to like keep reflecting lights off of mirrors. You eventually get to the point in this where both Link and Medley now have like the ability to, you know, divert light, and they can kind of do it in tandem, like reflect light off of Medley's harp onto Link's shield and stuff like that. So you end up getting some puzzles that kind of utilize both of them. And this dungeon does a good job of using those puzzle elements of controlling two characters in combination of reflecting light with one, and then, as we're about to see, with two characters that can reflect lights, and building upon ideas presented to you throughout the dungeon, much like the other dungeons in the Wind Waker.
That's one of the first things that my mind went to when playing through this dungeon, is just the way that they introduce you to the light, and the way that they show you how Medley can do it, and the different things that you can do with the light, and the co-op puzzles, so that by the point when you go through that linear first section and get the mirror shield, it's like an instant flip of a switch where the game's like, alright, you should know enough to the point where now these are all co-op redirecting the light puzzles. So you gotta get Medley in one position, and then you gotta get Link in another position to do what you already know how to do with this light. Which I feel like, as I was going through this, I noticed that the first half of this dungeon is pretty much dead straight linear, not really any different freedom of exploration. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's fine, whatever, it's okay. And then, as the puzzles were progressing, I was trying to give this dungeon like a fair shake, and then immediately it was throwing stuff at me that was impressing me.
The dungeon remains like fairly linear the whole time. Like there's some minor digressions. There's like kind of one where it's like you have to go in one room or the other first, but like there's some good stuff, but I think it to me follows a similar path where it does just set up kind of the main puzzle feature and like build upon it more so than it does anything else, I feel like.
That's what I ended up liking the most, is that it just continues iterating on that. It eventually introduces mirrors, which is just another point of reflection for you and Medley and Link. I do like that they just continued iterating on that until they get to the big one at the end. This is a good example of a linear dungeon done well, I think.
At this point, I am already like, well, the main thing here is the puzzles that are just building up, so
I think that's a point of contention a lot of times with this dungeon and just with Wind Waker's dungeons in general. None of these are brain-busting puzzles, really. You just have to push that mirror like a couple spots forward. It's not like you need to drop the mirror from the ceiling and then put it in a precarious place with a freedom to push it wherever. It's kind of laid out for you. But I do really like, in concept, those like multi-room connected puzzle type things. That also kind of reminds me of like the Spirit Temple Ocarina of Time puzzle, where like you have to tilt the mirror and shine it on the face or whatever to get the puzzle just before you get into the boss room of Spirit Temple.
We're getting kind of to the end part of this dungeon, so I kind of talk about the bigger nitpicks I have, because that one's kind of minor, you know, that doesn't really bug me. One minor one I also have is that they're doing a good job of like teaching me these puzzles like organically, and I'm like, oh, that's cool, that's neat how they do that. There's one spot where you have to push a mirror into place in one room before you like use it in another room that it's connected to. Then I push that mirror into place, and I'm in that next room, and it's probably, I think, the best puzzle of the dungeon. I actually kind of think this is where the dungeon should end, personally, but it's this puzzle where now you have to reflect the light from the mirror in the opposite direction to then reflect it a different way with Link. That's really cool. The only problem is you go into that room and it's kind of lame. I think Medley's like, hey, if only there's a way that we could shine lights off of each other or whatever. It's like,
yeah.
that's
Yeah, sure.
awful. Like you should be teaching us, you know?
That actually is one thing too that I did notice that like didn't really bother me, but it kind of made me laugh. Like I got a few hints from Medley and they always came way too late. Like after I had already been playing around with these puzzles, and I'm like, yeah, I get it. It's fine.
It just reminded me of the Fire Temple, where I felt like Navi kept being like, hey, you want to really hit this pillar down? There's something down there. Hey, there's something. I was like, okay, I get it. I don't know. That's kind of minor. It's really the last room puzzle that I think you like, a lot of people like. I just really don't like the final puzzle where it's a ton of mirrors. What you have to do in that is like make this one big continuous light reflection. My issue with it is just that it's like a puzzle that's solved like right away, but it takes you like 10 minutes to do it. Like I gotta push this here, push this here, push this here, push this here, especially when it's like pre-described locations that you're pushing it to. I think if there was like maybe a faster way to do it, of like moving the mirrors, similar to like pulling out magnesis and like sliding it, and it wasn't just like a specific spot you have to push the mirror to. But for me, it's just it's one that like I think
tedious.
Yeah, it's tedious to me. I think maybe your first time it will probably take a second for it to click, but they kind of signpost everything. Like, here's where you should shine the light. Here's where Medley should stand. We put her little symbol, and I guess there's like could be reasons for that, but it just from that like it takes away from the puzzling nature of it a little bit.
I can understand that frustration, because it is, especially comparing it to some of the dungeons that both of us have expressed praise for in some of the older games, where it's like brain-busting puzzles and really make you think. You really don't have to think that much in this puzzle. To call it a puzzle, I feel like it fits, but it's not super accurate, because it kind of just solves itself. It's just a series of motions that you have to go through to get to the end result. The reason that I actually really, really like it, and it is, I kind of have the opposite feeling. This is satisfying for me every single time. There are two main reasons for that. One is that the methods of getting everything into place kind of tests everything that the dungeon has taught you about redirecting the lights and stuff. So it's not just like doing one thing and then pushing a mirror into place. It's like getting Medley into one spot on top of a couple steps, and then redirecting it to an angle where Link can get on top of other steps, and then Link has to redirect it to burn down a wall that has the mirror behind it, and then you gotta push the mirror into place and stuff like that. And I know that just sounds like adding additional steps, but it feels like the full realization to me of the kinds of puzzles you've been solving in this dungeon. And two, this is like the main reason why it's always satisfying to me. It doesn't necessarily feel like a puzzle as in like solving a slide puzzle or something. This feels more to me like building a Lego set or something like that. Because you get a Lego set, you see the picture, it's going to be like a cool castle and stuff, but that doesn't take away the satisfaction of putting every piece together one by one and looking at the thing at the end and being like, look at this thing I made. This is so cool. It's like a different sense of satisfaction, because the end result of that puzzle is that you have two huge zigzagging beams of light that are redirected at Link and Medley, who are then shining them into the eyeballs of this giant statue and illuminating the whole room. For as simple as the puzzle actually is, I think the end result is worth it for me every time, just because it's so cool. And that is something that we talked about in our Tower of the Gods video. That is something that is true for Wind Waker's dungeons and just Wind Waker in general for me, which is that if the game ever slips in terms of high quality puzzles or challenge or brain busting stuff, it automatically makes up for it with super crazy cool cinematic or atmospheric stuff.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Conceptually, it is like a cool little set piece there. But yeah, like I think for me, it just like the other aspects outweigh it, where like I can never enjoy it. And for me, the previous puzzle kind of got that point across well enough. But like I said, I do appreciate the big set piece nature of this.
Other than just the general atmosphere being really good, I think that aspect of it being a tomb is also supported really well. Like the mini boss is really cool. You got like the Stalfos mini boss battle, which is a lot of fun. You're in like a big crypt room and like they're all rising out of the coffins and stuff. That's just an aspect of this dungeon that happens a lot, which is the coffins opening up or the coffins falling down to reveal something inside. And there's also a really cool room, the one with all the re-deads. It's super simple. You just walk into a room and it's a semicircle of coffins, and one of them has the key, but there's a bunch of re-deads in the rest of them. So it's like if you're doing it the way they want you to, you're just jumping into a pit of re-deads, which is very scary.
Probably the freakiest re-dead design. I think a lot of people would agree. Light affects these enemies in different ways. In particular, you need it to defeat the pose, sort of need it to defeat them as you come across them in the dungeon. But that would lead us all the way to the final boss of the dungeon, which is this giant Poe named Jalhalla. He's got a lantern, and he menaces you with it. He also
spooky fella.
There's spikes surrounding the room as you fight him, and he sucks in air and tries to blow you back. But if you take that one ray of light that is sticking down at some point in the room, you can kind of stun him with it. You can go pick him up, throw him against the spikes, and he shatters into a bunch of Poes. And each time you gotta try to take out all the Poes, and as you go, it becomes less and less until you finally can take him down.
He's a goofball. This fight is super easy, especially for this late in the game, but it's really fun. I even had the hurricane spin. I got the hurricane spin already by the time I played this dungeon.
Oh, that's all I did, yeah.
Yeah, so the part when he splits into a bunch of Poes, that just completely nullifies it. But I think it's so much fun. I feel like he constantly keeps you on your toes because he can spit the fire, he can blow you around, you can't get too close to the walls because there's spikes. I don't know, I just think it's very satisfying, knocking him to the ground, picking him up, and rolling him like a giant bowling ball into the spikes.
Yeah, the hurricane spin was very satisfying. The fight doesn't really feel like it evolves. It's kind of a fun novelty though. If it keeps you moving and keeps you engaged, that's kind of all this game really needs to do. It just really needs to kind of be exciting, and it kind of is. It kind of is. It's not like the anglerfish where you're just standing in one place, just slashing over and over.
Yeah, exactly.
And here we are able to conduct medley and restore some of the power to the Master Sword. So where does that put it on your list of the dungeons in the game? How do you feel about this one?
So that was obviously that's the first benchmark, is to compare it to the other dungeons in the game. And I did, like I said earlier, this is one even specifically where I was like, okay, a lot of people default to saying they like this dungeon a lot, but I really want to make sure I go in unbiased. I try and look at everything, and then by the time I got halfway in, I was already impressed, which is kind of a similar feeling I had with Tower of the Gods, but it's definitely not to that level for me. So in terms of Wind Waker, I think it's below Tower of the Gods, above Forbidden Woods for me. So
okay,
just from a starting point on my list, that's 21, 22, that area. And looking at the other dungeons that are around there, right below Forbidden Woods, I have Fire Temple, which kind of makes sense because I was thinking about Fire Temple when thinking about this dungeon too, because it's kind of similar linear progression. You made the comparison of Navi hinting at puzzles and stuff. That's not why I was thinking of it. I was more just kind of comparing the progression of the dungeon.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
like the Fire Temple, I also think is pretty atmospherically strong. But this to me just felt like an even stronger version of that. But that said, even looking just above that, I have dungeons like Jabu Jabu's Belly and Sword and Shield Maze, and Key Cavern, which are all like examples of great puzzles and ones that you actually have to think about and cool progression. So immediately after Forbidden Woods, I couldn't go much higher. So I ended up putting it right at number 20, just above Explorer's Crypt, just below Jabu Jabu's Belly.
Okay, right above the crypt. It's kind of fitting.
Crypt, which is also, yeah, I also think it's fitting too, because, you know, you compare those two, and it's just another... There are things that Explorer's Crypt does better, and I think there are also things Earth Temple does better, so it's kind of a toss-up, but I decided that Earth Temple was just so much more memorable for me.
Yeah.
That's what really put it over Explorer's Crypt.
So it gets to jump into your top 20 for now. Which is pretty exciting.
Just barely at number 20.
Okay. Well, so this was one for me where I was kind of struggling to rank it because I got my grievances in about the last puzzle, which it was starting to remind me of like this game in particular. I think what it's been is like each dungeon, it's been like, for me, it's really got to be like the puzzles that are going on and like where they go to and how they interact with the other puzzles in the different game are like what sells these dungeons. And in a way, like I kind of said the things I don't really like about the final part of that, and it reminds me of how I was saying in Ocarina of Time, it reminded me of the Fire Temple, where I was saying like similar to that, where like they made these big 3D spaces that most of them aren't necessarily that complex. It's more about the thematics and then also like doing something unique that you've kind of never seen, like in the Deku Tree, like just that web, jumping through the web kind of blew me away, you know. So they were all kind of like made or broken on like usually one really cool puzzle that kind of stands out with the rest of the dungeon, you know, like the bombing the eyes of Dodongo or whatever. And so like because that's how I felt about kind of the puzzles here with the light and stuff like that. That was kind of a big disappointment that kind of sticks out to me of like, the ending I kind of wish was a little bit better. So like while there was like things that were like, oh, this is like cool and new, like there were things that was like, oh, it's kind of a bummer. So like when I think of the other dungeons in the game, I think of just really liking some of those gameplay elements more, like stuff even as far back as Dragon Roost, like just liking I loved all the cute little puzzles of like breaking the barriers and stuff with the sticks or the torches and stuff. But at the same time, it's still very like the puzzles are pretty fun and it's got a cool vibe. So like I didn't want to like I know I'm gonna be controversial because I know it's like a beloved one for people, but I'm thinking like I don't think it's like horrible either. So I want there to be context for that, but I think honestly I would probably put it for me below Dragon Roost Cavern. I'm not trying to be like controversial or contrarian or anything. I find that dungeon and like the thematics and the puzzles and everything more fun and kind of like interesting to me. Like the ascent up the mountain and all the I don't know, all the like different clever puzzles that they kind of throw in there, as opposed to, like I said, how I was kind of like bummed out by the ending of this dungeon. It always like kind of leaves a sour taste in my mouth, if that makes sense.
If you put someone in front of me and I said they were like, give me something cool and exciting in Zelda to play, I probably wouldn't sit them down in front of the Earth Temple from Wind Waker. It's got kind of like a different mind. You almost need like a different mindset going into it.
Well, it's nice because now I don't really have a big range here that I can really put it in. It's between the 35th spot and the 30th spot. And so I think if I had to place it, I'd probably put it above Wing Dungeon. Because I think that does have a lot of fun puzzles I really like, but it's, I don't know, it's about on par with it. Like, it's a different scope. It's hard to compare. There's like a lot, I feel like a lot more micro puzzles in Wing Dungeon, where this leads to a big multi-room thing. So it's hard to compare, but I'd put that just below. I think Unicorn's Cave, I kind of have done a disservice compared to what everyone else thinks, but I do think that's a very strong dungeon. So I think I could see it being there. But again, it's kind of weird actually trying to compare this dungeon to two Oracle dungeons. Like they're so different in a lot of ways. So that makes it 33 for me, which is only in the grand scheme of things, it's not too horribly right.
Yeah, no, that's I think that's fair. I think it's definitely fair. I'm looking at your list now and looking at some of the ones, like the ones that you've decided to place above it. I don't think any of them I would be like, oh, well, you're totally wrong. That has to be below. Like, you could easily make a case for all of the ones you have above it to be above it. I can see that. I think that's a good.
I'm not crazy.
I mean, we're what, like 70 dungeons in, something like that. The 30 or 33, 32. That's not that bad.
Yeah, I mean, I got it above Desert Palace, and I think that's a great dungeon. But yeah, you know, one thing I'm noticing, we'll get into it, because even looking at we're not at the end of the series, but looking at your list, you know, Wind Waker's, it's only scratching the surface of the top dungeons, and we're almost done with the game. And I'm formulating a new opinion about this game and about the sailing. I'm been talking about this sailing. I'm excited. Well, we're not even going to be talking about that more, because in the next dungeon, I think we're going to sail right to the Wind Temple. I mean, we'll talk about what you got to do to get into it. But yeah, I'm excited to get back out on the seas and talk about it with you.
Oh yeah.
That means we only have like a few episodes left, so that's pretty exciting. Corey, thanks for hanging out and talking to me, and we'll see everybody in the next video.